There is a place on the edge of the world where 1,000 years of voices have been swallowed by wind. Stand on the high plateau above the river gorge, and you can still feel it. The outline of a city that once made kings nervous and merchants greedy. You can still see walls that look too proud to have fallen. You can still walk streets that used to be crowded with silk and spice and prayer. And then you notice what isn't there. No smoke rising from hearths. No bells calling people to worship. No children running between market stalls. Only stone, grass, and silence. This is Ani, the city of 1,001 churches, the medieval Armenian capital that was once one of the richest places on earth, and is now a ghost city, stranded on a frontier, staring across a border that didn't exist when it was alive. How does a capital become a ruin so complete that even its name sounds like a whisper? To answer that, we have to go back to the moment Ani stopped being a place and became a prize. A prize for kings. A prize for empires. A prize for the kind of history that doesn't knock politely, it breaks down the door. Ani was born in a landscape made for defense and made for drama. A basalt plateau thrust forward like the prow of a ship, with deep ravines on either side where the river cuts the earth open. From above, it looks secure, almost arrogant. From below, it looks impossible to take. That geography wasn't just scenery. It was a promise. Long before Ani became famous, people understood the value of this perch. Fortifications rose here early, and the settlement grew in the shadow of power. But the true transformation came with a dynasty that understood something essential about survival in the medieval world. Walls are not enough. You need money. You need legitimacy. You need a story that other people will believe. In the late 10th century, that story belongs to the Bagratuni kings of Armenia. Armenia had been a battleground between giants for centuries, squeezed between rival empires and forced to learn the art of endurance. Armenian nobles, the Nakharars, guarded their lands fiercely. Monasteries guarded learning even more fiercely. And in the middle of that, the Bagratunis tried to do what so many rulers dream of, and so few accomplish: unify a fractured realm and make it last. In 961, King Ashat III made a decision that would change everything. He moved the capital to Ani. It wasn't just a change of address, it was a declaration. Ani would be a capital that could not be ignored. Ashat was called the Merciful, and it wasn't an empty title. He built hospitals, he supported the poor, he tried to bind a kingdom together not only with taxes and soldiers, but with loyalty. But mercy, in the medieval world, did not mean softness. It meant strength with purpose. Because Ashat knew what was coming. When you sit at the crossroads of empires, you don't get to choose peace. Peace is something you buy, bargain for, and sometimes fake long enough to build what you need. Ani began to swell. Merchants arrived first, the way they always do, following opportunity and like water finds a crack in stone. The Silk Road was not one road, but a web of routes, and Ani sat close enough to the great arteries of trade to feel the pulse. Caravans moved through the region carrying textiles, precious metals, spices, glass, horses, and stories. Every transaction left a trace: coin, contract, rumor, rivalry. Then came the builders. Ani's skyline rose fast, and it rose with intent. This was not a city that grew by accident. It was designed to impress, to intimidate, to endure. New walls were laid with towers that seemed to watch the horizon. Gates were carved and reinforced. Streets were planned. Water systems were engineered. And everywhere, churches. Not modest chapels tucked into corners, but stone statements. Sacred architecture used as political language. They called Ani the city of 1,001 churches. The number was probably poetic, a way of saying more than you can count. But even if it was exaggeration, it reveals something true. Faith was everywhere, and it was visible. Imagine walking into Ani at its height. You pass through the city walls and suddenly the air changes. You smell bread and smoke and animals. You hear metalwork ringing from workshops. You hear Armenian spoken in the streets, and other languages too, because trade makes cities multilingual. You see merchants from distant places bargaining with locals who know exactly how valuable their position is. And above the noise, church domes and stone arches catch the light. Ani was not a backwater. It was a metropolis by medieval standards, home to tens of thousands of people. Some estimates push higher. Whatever the true number, the city was big enough to have neighborhoods, professions, rivalries, and the kind of daily life that never makes it into chronicles. A mother negotiating for grain, a stonemason with cracked hands shaping a block that will outlast his name, a young priest practicing sermons he hopes will be remembered, a merchant counting coins twice because he doesn't trust anyone, including himself. All of them living under the same truth. Ani was rich, and riches attract attention. The Bagratuni kings poured their ambition into stone. The cathedral of Ani rose under the architect Tredat, a name that deserves to be spoken with respect. Tredat was the kind of builder whose mind could hold mathematics and beauty at the same time. His cathedral was daring, elegant, and engineered with a confidence that feels almost modern. And here is one of those details that should stop you for a second. Tredat was so renowned that he was called to Constantinople to help repair the dome of Hagia Sophia after an earthquake. Think about what that means. In an age when empires measured their greatness in architecture, the greatest church of the Byzantine world needed an Armenian architect to save it. Ani was not merely influenced by its neighbors. It influenced them back. This is the part of the story where a city seems unstoppable. The part where the music swells and you can almost believe history is a straight line upward. But Ani's greatness was built on a fault line. Because to be a jewel on the Silk Road is to be seen, and to be seen is to be wanted. Ani's kings were not ruling in a vacuum. Byzantium watched from the west, powerful and patient, claiming to be the true heir of Rome and seeing Armenia as both buffer and opportunity. To the east and south, new forces were rising, including Turkic powers that would reshape the region with speed and violence that stunned the settled world. Armenia was Christian in a region where political power was shifting toward Islamic dynasties. That didn't mean constant religious war, not in the simplistic way people sometimes imagine. Trade crossed faith lines. Diplomacy crossed them too. But difference mattered when empires needed a reason, a banner, a justification. Ani's rulers tried to balance on a knife edge. Some did it well. Others inherited problems they didn't create. And then came the moment when the city's fate began to slip out of Armenian hands. In 1045, Byzantium took Ani, not through a glorious battlefield victory that bards could romanticize, but through pressure, political maneuvering, and the slow, tightening grip of a larger power swallowing a smaller one. The Bagratuni line fractured. Claims and counterclaims weakened the kingdom. And Byzantium, ever strategic, moved in. For the people of Ani, this was not an abstract transfer of sovereignty. It was a change in taxes, in officials, in the language of authority. It was the feeling that the center of gravity had shifted away from them. And it was the opening of a door. Because the Byzantines, for all their sophistication, were about to face a storm they could not contain. In 1064, the Seljuk Turks arrived. The Seljuks were not just raiders. They were empire builders on horseback, masters of mobility, striking with speed and withdrawing before slow armies could respond. They had already begun to change the balance of power across the Middle East. Their victories sent shockwaves through the region, and their momentum felt like destiny. Ani, with its proud walls and deep ravines, must have looked like a challenge worth conquering. a city whose capture would be a message. The siege was brutal. Chroniclers describe terror, slaughter, and a city overwhelmed. The details blur, as they often do in medieval sources, where numbers swell and horror becomes language. But the core truth is clear. Ani fell. And when a city falls in the medieval world, it is not just a change of flag. It is a tearing. Families separated, homes burned, churches desecrated or repurposed, people killed, enslaved, displaced. The kind of violence that doesn't end when the fighting stops because it keeps living inside survivors. If you try to imagine Ani after 1064, don't picture an instant empty ruin. Picture something more haunting. A city still standing, but wounded. A city where familiar streets feel wrong because the people walking them are not the same. A city where the sound of worship changes. A city where merchants wonder whether the trade routes will remain safe, whether the next caravan will come, whether the next army will. And yet, Ani did not die that day. This is one of the most surprising parts of its story. Ani endured through conquest. It changed hands more than once. It adapted. It remained valuable enough for rulers to fight over it. For a time, Ani passed through different powers, including Georgian influence. There were periods of revival, moments when the city seemed to breathe again. Trade continued, crafts continued, life continued. But the tension never left. Because the medieval world had entered a new phase, one defined by instability at scale. The great networks that made cities rich also made them vulnerable. If the route shifts, the city starves. If the frontier hardens, commerce dries up. If the empire changes, the tax collectors arrive with new demands. Ani's story is not just about violence. It's about fragility. A prosperous city is like a living organism. It needs circulation, goods, people, ideas. Cut off the circulation, and the body weakens. And then, in 1319, nature delivered a blow no army could plan. An earthquake struck Ani. Stone that had stood for centuries cracked. Buildings collapsed. Churches that had seemed eternal fell into broken geometry. The cathedral itself suffered damage that would never truly be repaired. When we talk about ruined cities, we often imagine invaders as the main cause. But sometimes the earth itself decides that your age is over. After the earthquake, Ani struggled. It had been battered by politics and war. Now it was physically broken. Repairing a city of that scale required wealth, stability, and skilled labor. Ani had less and less of all three. And then came the slow, merciless part. Not the dramatic siege, not the single catastrophic event. The slow leaving. A family deciding the market is better elsewhere. A craftsman moving to a safer town. A merchant rerouting caravans. A priest taking sacred objects to protect them in a monastery far away. One by one, the reasons to stay grow weaker. In time, the great city became a place where the wind had more presence than people. Ani was still known, still visited, still fought over at times. But it was no longer the beating heart of a kingdom. It was a memory with walls. And what walls they were. Even in ruin, Ani is overwhelming. The fortifications stretch with a confidence that feels almost defiant, as if the city is still waiting for its citizens to return. The gates stand like mouths that will never speak again. Inside, the churches remain like scattered survivors. There is the cathedral, still majestic, even scarred, its interior open to the sky in places, its arches holding on through sheer stubbornness. There is the Church of St. Gregory of Tigran-Homens, famous for its frescoes, where painted saints still stare out from walls as if they can't believe the congregation has vanished. There is the Church of the Holy Redeemer, split in half, a building torn open like a book ripped down the spine. That half-church is one of the most haunting sights in Ani, because it makes the metaphor physical. A civilization cut, exposed, unfinished. And there are the details people miss if they only think in big narratives. The carved inscriptions, the ornamental stonework, the traces of color, the remnants of everyday spaces. The sense that this was not a museum. It was a home. It's easy to romanticize ruins, to treat them like beautiful corpses. But Ani is not only beautiful. Ani is accusatory. It asks you to remember that a city like this didn't vanish because people stopped being human. It vanished because humans did what humans do: competed, betrayed, conquered, negotiated, survived. And because geography and economics and the ground beneath their feet did what they do. The story of Ani is a story of power, but it's also a story of ordinary people caught inside power's machinery. Imagine an Ani merchant in the early 11th century, when the city still glittered. He has connections in distant markets. He knows the price of silk before it arrives. He knows which official can be bribed and which one cannot. He knows how to smile while calculating profit. He also knows something else, something he doesn't say out loud. He knows that if the wrong army appears on the horizon, his wealth becomes a target, his home becomes a trap, his city's greatness becomes a liability. So he invests not only in goods, but in escape routes, in favors, in alliances, in plans whispered to family members late at night. That is what it means to live in a crossroads city. You live with opportunity in one hand and anxiety in the other. Now imagine a stonemason during Ani's building boom. He is proud. He is exhausted. He is shaping the city's future with tools that will outlast him. He knows his work is sacred, because it will frame prayers long after he is gone. He may never travel far, but his stones will speak for him. And then, after conquest, he sees soldiers walking through the streets. He sees buildings damaged. He hears a new language of command. He wonders whether the next commission will come, or whether his skills will be used to repair what was broken by strangers. He is not a king. He doesn't decide policy, but his life changes anyway. This is the human truth that hides inside the word ruin. Ruin is not an event. It is a process that happens to people first. Ani's location, once its greatest strength, became part of its doom. It sat near a frontier that hardened over time. Empires drew lines, borders sharpened, the flow of trade shifted like a river changing course. And then, centuries later, the modern world added a final layer of silence. Ani now lies near the closed border between Turkey and Armenia, a geopolitical scar that keeps the site isolated. The city that once thrived on connection became trapped by separation. There is something almost cruel in that. A Silk Road city, built on movement, now defined by a line you cannot cross. Yet, despite everything, Ani still speaks. Not with voices, but with absence. Because absence is a kind of language. It tells you what used to be there. It forces you to imagine the missing. And if you listen carefully, Ani's silence tells you stories that loud places can't. It tells you that medieval Armenia was not a footnote. It was a civilization capable of building wonders, producing architects sought by emperors, sustaining trade networks that connected continents. It tells you that religious identity could be both a source of unity and a reason others used to justify conquest. It tells you that no wall, however thick, can guarantee safety when the world around you shifts. And it tells you something unsettling about prosperity. We tend to think wealth is protection, that success builds immunity. But Ani shows the opposite. Wealth can make you visible, and visibility can make you vulnerable. There is a reason travelers and chroniclers kept writing about Ani long after its power faded. They were haunted by the contrast between what it was and what it became. A city that once held royal courts and crowded markets, reduced to wind through broken arches. A place that once rang with hymns, now visited by footsteps that echo because no one answers. And even now, Ani remains contested in a quieter way. Through memory, through heritage, through the question of who gets to claim the past. Because ruins are never just ruins. They are evidence. They are proof that people lived, believed, built, and lost. Proof that a culture existed in full color, even if time tries to bleach it out. Proof that history is not only written by victors, but also carved into stone by those who had no idea they would be forgotten. If you stand in Ani today, you are standing in the aftermath of decisions made by kings and generals, yes, but also in the aftermath of countless small human choices. To stay, to leave, to rebuild, to surrender, to resist, to pray. You are standing in a city that once fed itself on connection and died by disconnection. And that is why Ani feels so modern. Because we also live in a world of networks, trade routes, digital routes, alliances, supply chains. We also build our prosperity on movement and trust. We also assume that what works today will work tomorrow. Ani is the reminder that it might not. That borders can harden, that roots can shift, that earthquakes can come without warning, literal or metaphorical. That empires, whether political or economic, can change the rules overnight. The stones of Ani are not only Armenian history, they are human history. A warning written in architecture, a question posed by silence. What happens to a society when the forces that made it thrive become the forces that expose it? What happens when a capital becomes a frontier and then becomes nothing at all? Ani does not answer with words. It answers by existing, stubbornly, in ruin. By showing us a cathedral that still reaches upward even when its roof is gone. By showing us walls that still guard an emptiness. By showing us that greatness is real, and so is loss. And maybe that is the final lesson of the ghost city on the Silk Road. Not that everything ends, but that everything can change faster than we think. That the most vibrant places can become silent. And that when we look at a ruin, we are not only looking backward, we are looking into a mirror and asking whether we recognize the world we are building now and whether it will still have voices 1,000 years from today.
If you liked this video, please hit the like and subscribe button for more.